What's going on, everybody? Welcome back into the FantasyPros YouTube channel. My name is Lucas Wencl, and today we are talking about 10 players that you should be looking to stash ahead of the Week 12 slate and ahead of next week's waiver wire run as well. Before we dive on into that list of players, though, you can take the guesswork out of waiver wire decisions with FantasyPros Waiver Assistant. It will give you instant analysis on potential moves from over 100 fantasy experts. You'll also discover both the weekly and rest of season impact for every waiver ad. All you have to do is visit fantasypros.com/myplaybook or download the Fantasy Football My Playbook app. Again, all you have to do, visit fantasypros.com/myplaybook or download the Fantasy Football My Playbook app to optimize your roster today. Kicking off our list this week is Arizona Cardinals running back Trey Benson, who's rostered in 26% of leagues. Trey Benson led our list last week while he was on bye, so not much has changed ahead of Week 12. In his 2 games prior to the bye, Benson scored double-digit fantasy points and finished as a top 24 running back in both games. I'm not pledging that streak will continue, but their schedule coming up is extremely favorable. They get the Seahawks twice, the Patriots, and the Panthers in 4 of their next 5 games. As we inch closer to the fantasy playoffs, this is the time we want to make sure our handcuffed running backs are stashed. It would be a shame if James Conner were to get injured down the home stretch and you didn't have his backup stashed. It's these kinds of moves that can keep your season afloat when it matters most, so let's get on stashing Trey Benson this week, especially if you're a James Conner manager and have the roster space to do so. Our second stash this week is Marquez Valdes-Scantling, wide receiver for the New Orleans Saints, who's rostered in 25% of leagues. I know MVS is heading into his bye week, but we are 100% going to take advantage of your league mates who are dropping him for that very reason. It's seldom at this point in the season you can add a player off the waiver wire who's given you 16 plus fantasy points in consecutive weeks and has a carved out role going forward. Chris Olave is still set to miss time after the team's Week 12 bye, and the Saints have literally nobody else in their wide receiver room. You can make the argument that too much of his production has come on splashy plays, but Derek Carr has been thriving on those all year long. We saw it frequently with Rashid Shaheed at the start of the season. I understand you can't plug and play MVS this week, but he is absolutely worth the stash considering he's somehow available in 75% of leagues still. The next player to consider stashing is running back Roschon Johnson of the Chicago Bears, who's rostered in 23% of leagues. You might not realize it, but Roschon Johnson has scored more rushing touchdowns this year than guys like Breece Hall, Josh Jacobs, and Devon Achane. Even while playing behind DeAndre Swift, Johnson still racked up 41 total yards on 11 touches and finished as the running back 21 against the Packers on Sunday. The schedule is daunting going forward, but if Johnson is going to be a nuisance around the goal line, there's potential standalone value moving forward. Not to mention, he's the direct handcuff to DeAndre Swift now with Khalil Herbert being traded to the Cincinnati Bengals. So if Roschon Johnson is still floating on the waiver wire in your league, it wouldn't be a bad idea to stash him at the end of your bench. Another handcuff running back you should look to stash is Cam Akers of the Minnesota Vikings, who's rostered in 22% of leagues. Even while primarily playing as the backup, we saw Akers flash standalone value against the Titans last week. He finished with 11.6 fantasy points on the afternoon, finished as the running back 20 in PPR formats, and logged double-digit carries for the second straight week. He is clearing away the preferred backup to Aaron Jones in Minnesota, and this is extremely similar to Trey Benson. Like James Conner, Aaron Jones doesn't have the best track record of staying healthy, and if something were to happen to him down the stretch, Cam Akers immediately becomes the lead back for the Minnesota Vikings. Not to mention, the schedule coming up isn't half bad either, getting the Bears twice, the Cardinals, and the Falcons in their next 4 contests. We're going to keep stashing handcuffed running backs and look at Ray Davis of the Buffalo Bills, who's rostered in 18% of leagues. Once again, I am well aware the Bills are entering their Week 12 bye, but we'll continue to take advantage of your league mates who are dropping valuable players at this point in the season. Now, I know Davis has only scored 1.7 points total in his last 2 games, but this is yet another premier handcuff stash that should be rostered. We've seen flashes of standalone value from Ray Davis, scoring 11.7 points in Week 7 and 17 points in Week 9 against the Dolphins. And if something were to happen to James Cook, well, we've seen that too. 18.2 fantasy points against the Jets in Week 6 while getting fed 23 opportunities. Stashing players is all about staying 2 to 3 steps ahead of your league mates. And if they want to assume they can stash players like Ray Davis after their bye weeks, they're wrong because you're going to beat them to the punch. Coming in next is running back Jaylen Wright of the Miami Dolphins, who's rostered in 6% of leagues. At this point, it appears that Jaylen Wright has taken over as the running back 2 behind Devon Achane for the Dolphins. For the second straight week, Wright has outsnapped and outtouched Mostert, who's ran for negative yardage over the last 2 weeks. You and I have more rushing yards than Raheem Mostert in that stretch. The Dolphins are still scrapping their way back into playoff contention, and they're making sure Jaylen Wright gets his reps before the season comes down to the wire. This is yet another fragile running back room, and if anything were to happen to Devon Achane, Jaylen Wright appears to be first in line to take a majority of the rushing work. I know it's not fun to stash handcuffs that have limited standalone value, but Jaylen Wright should be stashed in far more leagues with how this backfield is trending rest of season. Dipping back into the wide receivers, consider stashing Jalen Coker of the Carolina Panthers, who's rostered in only 5% of leagues. Similar to Trey Benson, Coker is coming out of a Week 11 bye, so not much has changed since he made this list last week. Against the Giants in Germany, Coker led all Panthers wide receivers with a 32% target share and ran a route on 89% of Bryce Young's dropbacks. Xavier Legette was still the team leader in route participation, but this Panthers offense is looking for anybody to catch the football at this point. Adam Thielen is medically cleared to play and has been practicing this week, but why not see what the Panthers have with Jalen Coker rest of season? The Panthers do have an out in Thielen's contract after this season, though they would have to eat $5 million in dead cap, but I'm willing to stash Coker still and see what comes of his increased role prior to the bye. He's available in 95% of leagues. You could do a lot worse at the end of your bench. Another wide receiver to consider stashing this week is Kayshon Boutte of the New England Patriots, who's rostered in 5% of leagues. Over the last 3 weeks, Boutte has played at least 96% of the team's snaps in each game and has led the team in routes run over the last month. He's also drawn 6+ targets in each of his last 4 games, and something has to give here. The second-year wideout is on the field constantly, Drake May is one of the most exciting young quarterbacks in the league, and the volume is falling his way. Kayshon Boutte is probably the least exciting stash on our list this week, but when it comes to chasing ceilings of players available in 95% of leagues, Boutte may actually be towards the top of that list. If you're in need at the tight end position, consider stashing Theo Johnson of the New York Giants, who's rostered in only 2% of leagues. Johnson is also coming out of his Week 11 bye, and prior to, he had started to show some flashes. He had drawn 6 targets in each of his 2 games prior to the bye, and even finished as a tight end 7 in Week 9 against Washington, scoring 14.1 fantasy points. The change to Tommy DeVito at quarterback may not be a resounding positive, but it's worth noting that he targeted the tight end position 15.5% of the time last year per Ted Schmiz. With the recent uptick in volume, a post-bye bump, and a change at quarterback, it's worth at least exploring the upside Theo Johnson may have rest of season. At worst, you drop him to the waiver wire next week for the new hotness. Last but not least, for all of you playing in leagues where you start a defense and special teams unit, you can look to stash the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who are rostered in 42% of leagues. The Bucs defense has been a hot commodity coming off of their Week 11 bye, where last week I had mentioned they were rostered in only 15% of leagues. This isn't only a great plug and play this week, but a great rest of season stash too. After the Giants, they get the Panthers twice, the Raiders, the Dak Prescott-less Dallas Cowboys, and the Saints in 6 of their final 7 games. Managers are already jumping on them as a streaming option this week, but they may not realize the potential goldmine this defense could be down the stretch. If this unit is still available in your league, scoop them up now. Alrighty, y'all, that's it. That's all I've got for you here today, but before I sign off, remember, you can take the guesswork out of waiver wire decisions with FantasyPros Waiver Assistant. It will give you instant analysis on potential moves from over 100 fantasy experts. You'll also discover both the weekly and rest of season impact for every waiver ad. All you have to do is visit fantasypros.com/myplaybook or download the Fantasy Football My Playbook app. Again, all you have to do, visit fantasypros.com/myplaybook or download the Fantasy Football My Playbook app to optimize your roster today.